When I started making videos, I came up with a bit of a golden rule of sorts. That there was this one thing that I wasn't allowed to touch. The goal was to try and avoid a toxic response, to not try and force feelings when I simply don't have anything constructive to say. You've probably heard it before, but I told myself, no cape shit. Let me be clear, I really don't consider myself to be above the genre or anything like that. I truly cherish memories of animated renditions of superheroes being some of my earliest gateways into the medium of animation. It's just that distance seemed like a good idea when my relationship with this stuff is on its deathbed. This, and oh yeah, definitely this, are pretty much all that's left of my investment in the genre. I guess that burnout just isn't a good place to start. But hey, you're here, you clicked on the video. It doesn't take a telepath to work out that something clearly broke my rule. When I first heard rumblings of Fox's X-Men series making its way back to television, skepticism was only really natural. I just didn't have any faith to imagine that I might now sit in genuine excitement at the thought of what Marvel Animation could do next. This really was just supposed to be another rattling of the old nostalgia can of beans, something that I would definitely dip in and out of with ease. It just had to be a poor exercise in replication, some half-hearted meta-text. I knew this, I was certain. I could not be proven wrong. But thank God I was. Because what we got was something that the audience, and I'll say it, even frankly the mutants themselves needed. A deserved splice of fearless evolution. Decades after the end of the original series, and years into Marvel Studios' acquisition of the characters, we pick back up with the mutants exactly where we left them. And I can't believe I'm saying it, but the once definitive take on the X-Men coming back doesn't only do wonders to restore the brand, but it feels like they never went away. X-Men 97 is a direct continuation that leaves the team in the wake of the death of Professor Charles Xavier, the renewed development of weapons against the mutants, and the team now being led by Magneto, trying to atone for his actions as the unexpected new guiding hand of the X-Men. This isn't honestly unlike what's come before it, and it really is a lot to get up to speed on for the uninitiated, but it still is nothing short of a perfect point to approach this property from. Believe me, I really cannot understate what a dream scenario this is for a novice X-Men fan. You're confidently dropped into this point in the history where you kind of just have to sit with the information that a lot has happened already. Things have hurt these people. We're past the point of seeing what made them who they are now. The story isn't going to leave you in the dark about it, but the time that these guys are getting in the spotlight won't be squandered. There's no big blueprint that can't be wavered from, just a depth to relishing in what's not immediately being said, in what you will discover or choose to infer. It is to me the perfect means to maintain audience willingness to persevere with properties like this that Marvel will continue to bombard us with. It doesn't take much for the people behind these works just to realize that some trust should be placed in us just being able to pick this up and run with it. I mean, after all, how else do you really do it? X-Men is just this huge clusterfluff of retcons and too many cooks in the kitchen having done way too much to give decent coverage or even carve out any new territory. You can call something like this just rushing to the highs of the Claremont or the Morrison eras, but at the same time, why would you wait to do what no other adaptation has actually managed to achieve? And truly tap straight into the team's potential as quickly as possible? Why not just spend every available second celebrating what they've always been, before the lights get possibly shut off? Use this moment as a chance to cultivate a new awareness that the X-Men might just be the best to have ever done it. Make 2024 the year to remember just how much we love all these guys. The world that's presented that the X-Men play in has got more Marvel things hanging around in it than you can poke a big stick at, but it remains genuinely restrained. Those pieces are just here to make the mutants feel at home in a larger world, a clearly intrinsic piece that for too long has been kept separate, that hasn't been allowed to play on the same board. This isn't one of those pathetic occasions where the mutants have to try and remind all the big superheroes that whilst they've been having fun, the mutants have been off in the corner trying to survive the end of their race multiple times. What you witness is hard-hitting annihilation done to the mutants, not some perfect little pocket where they're allowed to make only sanctioned noise, actual world-shaking acts that make you struggle to believe that things can still be different next time. Because Cassandra Nova, the Brotherhood, the Savage Land, even elements of something like House of M. Any piece of the X-Men iconography that you can think of feels ready to make a play in this jigsaw of different eras. It's the kind of tapestry where, as long as there's something to be said, you can make any additions, skip, or blending and keep it consistent, and even keep the whole thing theoretically running for years. Even when it came to the questions that we had, thought had already been paid to them. The genre so often feels now like the tracks are being laid down just as the train hurtles towards it, entrenched in the kind of practice that directly hurts the people on the ground floor of the production. The "we'll find it in the edit" approach, damaging and lessening the final product. Industry-wide practices that the higher-ups are not going to abandon until it eventually tampers with the bottom line. X-Men 97 therefore looking for more heart in the more or less trodden ground of the history is just smart. The task more becomes about further preserving these stories, instead of just trying to outdo them. Instead of playing with toys that you don't understand the meaning or value of. About setting a table with material that you know doesn't need any kind of do-over. It's an honestly commendable and really refreshing way to approach world building. None of it is dependent on sitting in conjunction with or servicing another 5 different properties, or even launching a universe of its own. From the look of it, there is seemingly no further objective than to just do justice to what's being built here and now. If there were rules from above, any damaging oversight, then it feels invisible. Clear planning and consideration working to rectify the sad fact that comic book adaptations don't always create future comic book readers. It really shouldn't seem insane that the ones to recognize the benefit of furthering this genre through animation are the company that's... let's just check. Oh yeah, they built an empire out of it. But here we are. We have to accept to a degree that these adaptations will always be inherently inferior to their original source material, simply because it's only ink and imagination limiting what you can accomplish there. Being adapted into a long-running animated series is the best outcome for these histories and their characters, the best means to secure a future for the pages that they come from. Those definitive takes like The Batman, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, or Justice League Unlimited, all of them succeeded because they recognized the value in not moving past or leaving behind the lines that are already on paper. Let's be clear, animation does still cost, but just like with its predecessors, X-Men 97 never feels like it's going to say something like, "Quick, we need to get that expensive character out of here after just one scene." The people behind this get that pen should only be put to paper to realize here what you simply cannot give time to, or even create in live action. Permit something like Cyclops and Jean considering leaving the team the time that it needs to breathe. You should absolutely run wild animating a scene where Beast has to pilot a Sentinel like it's a mech suit, thoroughly aware that to do any of this in any other way might just cost more than the whole damn show itself. I mean hell, do both of those things in just the first episode even. These are limited opportunities to come close to the best of what the comics have managed to be, to the hopes that their creators envisioned for them. And to try and do that, X-Men 97 adopts the same philosophy as the Spider-Verse films. It admittedly doesn't reach those dizzying heights, but it still manages to prove capable when you want to pause any of it and try and see in those scenes the comic spreads that it could have come from, or maybe even still exist in. It's truly another champion of the comics come to life style that interests are starting to shift towards. If something like Spider-Verse, which is a whole film about doing just that, is considered a game changer for film, then worlds like 97, Primal, The Midnight Gospel, Arcane, Trigun Stampede, and of course Scavenger's Reign, are going to become the new benchmarks for television for doing the exact same thing. As good as something like Invincible frequently was, and as much as I wanted to love my adventures with Superman, there's no denying that they just don't possess the same style as this lot, that they just don't breathe the same way. There's significant difference in what's emoted. The speed, the ambition, and the impact, they're all apparent in minutes. This cel-shaded blending of 2D and 3D styles and pieces was easy to be skeptical about at first, but it's a feast for the eyes upon full viewing. From the buildings, to the costumes, to the weather, everything erupts with colour. There's not a single thing that doesn't just pop. There's neon-soaked stylings that coat just every inch of what you see, that I really feel I haven't seen the intensity of since the days of Gibbons and Moore. If something like Batman the Animated Series was famously only painted on black, then I can picture this team becoming similar legends, because they were clearly determined to use any colour they could get their hands on. Looking at the X-Men themselves, it reminds me of when I was a kid, where I used to be able to name all of them just like Pokemon. I can once again pick my favourites out of rows of dozens of them precisely because of the colour. This production clearly stopped caring for those dull, muted palettes and that fragile, oh-so-sensitive attachment to gaudy armor plates. You only need to look at how many uniforms they all go through, how many scenes rest on just an iconic line, how frequently Wolverine just gets shredded to pieces, in order to see how little all of this is about functionality now. Focus on stuff like posing and scale is necessary in its own right, don't get me wrong, but recently they've tended to overshadow something like a killer line that can just stop someone dead in their tracks. So when you embrace something like that classic, "I am about to announce everything that I am about to do," kind of classic comic book style of dialogue, anytime that someone like Storm speaks during action, you just get excited about all of it. Because yeah, there is this unshakable silliness to it, there's always going to be, but at the same time you give it a free pass. You don't let it detract from these moments where you start screaming at your television when these people tell you who they are. Because for once you get to buy into the hype of the performance, the writing, something that really should matter more than just a perfect landing. Across the whole stretch of the show, there are these beautifully saturated colours, and they adapt those comic book visuals gloriously. You can see it in the telepathy scan lines, the optic blasts that set the sky ablaze or throw Cyclops across the battlefield. You can feel the energy pulsate with each flex of magnetism, and there's this raw glow and buzz of the dimension inside of a teleport that makes you reevaluate all previous depictions of the superpower. There's no one superpower that was depicted with realism as the guiding principle of how to sell it. It feels like realism only really mattered here if it could somehow amplify the base effect of that fantastical imagery, to add to these new moments that are going to become the bedrocks of how these kind of abilities are imitated and portrayed going forward. I got to a point where if 97 had been shown in theatres, I would have been outside all of them with a huge sign trying to convince people to go inside and see what was on offer. I think that most of us who have waited for years to see such a confident vision would think about doing the same. Especially after we've had to sit through years of different filmmakers feeling, I guess, embarrassed, scared to acknowledge what form this material originated from, who could seemingly only offer intensely conservative takes. After all of that, we finally reached this point where the sheer power of her margin comic book roots is collectively accepted, and it's a time that I hope we never leave. Committing to these words, these colours, and these looks, it places the drama of all of it front and centre, as it should be. There should be no compromise on what we're seeing being freewheeling. At the end of the day, it needs to all be too much. We should be celebrating the self-expression that the X-Men just won't compromise on. Each one of these mutants donning these looks, these traits, it's a brave, constant statement on their belief in Xavier's dream, that now without him, is their responsibility to permeate through the minds of young mutants, through the minds of the marginalized, the voiceless, who really need to hear it, to know that there is a place for us. It shows that the creators get the responsibility that to bring these characters back to the screen like this should always be done specifically to stand against segregation, to draw as many eyes as possible onto the choice. A choice that can reflect or spark a pride that some might only just respect, but that most will always carry with us. To place emphasis on pronouns, to dress and look as we please, to disregard respectability politics and archaic dogmas, to not fit into these preconceived acceptable boxes, to love who we want to, even if that's just ourselves, living outly proud of who we are, because so many characters like the X-Men told us that we can, fighting just as they have for decades, to feel free, to get to live authentically as ourselves. There's this take where I celebrate that intent as just something that, I don't know, I guess, maybe owns the people who don't get what the X-Men actually are, but I care forever more about the good that these moves will actually create. A look inward, reminding us why this should be done at all. To attempt to try and distract from, or I guess, remove the politics of the X-Men, is just to miss the point. It tarnishes what its creators envisioned for these characters to achieve. You simply don't get one without the other. You never have, and if this is anything to go by as a product, then we never will again. Because yeah, it is enough to fill each episode with a team of different creeds, ethnicities, sizes, colours, genders, backgrounds. It really is great to see that, but still, why would you hold back on making their lives messy? Yeah, you guessed it, on the soap opera of the affair. Look at what Morph can't fully find a way to say to Wolverine. Give a genuine challenge to Beast's optimism. Have Jubilee and Sunspot walk the same path, but end up on different sides of the board. Make Scott contend with the fact that he's never really lived his life on his own terms. They're all still trying to be a team, but without the Professor, none of them are really on the same page anymore. None of them fully know exactly how his dream carries on. They're all just bursting with personality, and on paper there should be at least one lacking character, but no. They're all perfect, they're all layered, I care about all of them. And that's thanks to what's behind these moments. Moments that, as these stories should, don't just tell wild tales about these oppressed people, but place actual subjectivity directly onto their shoulders, that give significant challenges to their worldviews. Set a million sentinels on them, trap the team directly within that onslaught, strip Storm of a piece of herself that she's never not known. Make Magneto have to let a scared kid down. They constantly have to resist resigning themselves to just what's left, to buying the line, that it really is us and them. The pressing question of the season isn't, when is Magneto going to go bad again? It's, what will push him to it? Does he have it in him to remember the compassion that he's shown he's capable of? The world is continuing to just get so dreadfully crazy, and I think that media needs to start reflecting that to the point that we remember it's becoming allegory, not just totally satire. Magneto cannot stand again to watch life be considered expendable, cheap, worthless, something to eradicate. Bastion's attack on Genosha is primordial, senseless devastation, and it's because of that that Magneto's retaliation is a portrait of a near divine Punisher. Whether Magneto was right or wrong, it doesn't really matter. In the grand scheme of things, the ethics or the mechanics of that question are never really going to mean as much as the consideration paid to this man's pain. If you can ask yourself, have these victims' grievances been paid respect? Then you can decide for yourself if you would toe the line against them, or maybe stand beside them. To me, that really means something. I don't want to get precious about any of this, but I can't help but think of the effect that that narrative might have had on a younger me, that it could still have on young people today. Witnessing the kind of story where bigots will never be able to see themselves as anything but the ones who can't get with the picture. This big genre piece not just necessarily about superheroes, but about people trying to do some good with the time that they have. Characters like Spider-Man are always going to be these really effective ideals of heroism, because at the end of the day, anyone can wear that mask. But that's not how it works with the X-Men, because some people just aren't us. Not everyone is a mutant. Few of these characters have trained for any of this. At its core, a lot of what you're seeing really is just fight or flight, and we feel pity for those poor souls who come to that school looking for just that trouble, the ones who give them no choice. The X-Men are different because they're not compelled by some great responsibility. They're not wrestling with an immortal moral demon or resisting a bloody lineage. These are just people who wake up in the morning feeling vulnerable. All of them would consider turning it off if it meant that they could be someone else. Even if it's just for a moment, all of them might want to be seen as normal. But the truth is, there will be no before, no after. They don't just get to wake up and not be who they are. Characters like the X-Men exist to talk about just that, to not offer some dream of who we think we might want to be, but to help recognize who we are. It shouldn't always be about amplifying something hidden inside, but really what was never not there. It's impossible for some of us to not come away from this and works like it just thoroughly aware that we, the mutants, are here. We're not going anywhere. The rest of you are just gonna have to find a way to accept that. You don't owe us your tolerance, but don't ever think that you can deny us our right to seek it. The loneliness, the fire we face, the places they won't permit us to be part of. They're feelings that those of us who know them can never just call our own. They're moments that unite us. We may not be there with you, but to have known any of it is to be a mutant, and there are so many of us. You're not as alone as you might think. I really applaud what was made here. I'm still quite stunned that such a competent vision can come from caretakers who, I maintain, just across the other side of the pond, have got no idea what they're doing, how any of the X-Men will fit into their larger fold. But what they've still managed to build, however, is a space that I really hope ideas can continue to thrive in. I'm honestly not even really all that interested in where this chooses to go next, but I just can't remain silent when something like this comes along. I need everyone to see something that wants to talk about the future, something built to give us more to say. It frankly even borrows a final note from the professor himself, and it says it again to the whole world. We're here to stay. The next move is yours. We will be watching.